G'day and welcome to Down the Shed with Byron's VY Commodore project. Now we're changing out the centre bearing on the drive shaft and each coupling today. So I just thought I'd run through a bit of a video of how I do it. Tools for the job, a couple of basic spanners, 18mm, 19mm, ratchet, an extension with a 1/2 inch drive socket, using single hex for that, but you can also get away with using a 13mm. Little breaker bar, which are handy. One of the main tools is a couple of E-sockets, which is the E18. But if you don't have one of those, a 9/16 multi-hex socket will also do the job. Bit of lube, a couple of hammers. The copper hammer is handy as, but if you don't have that, that's cool. Obviously a couple of parts. Now these are just eBay specials. Bought that as a kit. A few blocks of wood. To make it easy on myself, I've ran the car up with some car ramps and jacked the back up and put some jack stands underneath so I can get underneath. But really all you need to do is either jack up the back and put a jack stand on each side so you can spin the tail shaft and wheels, or if you've got an open wheeler you can jack it up on one side and you can get underneath. So here's the main reason for our job today, the movement in that centre bearing. So as you take off, you'll hear a thump, 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 and that's normally the indicator for centre bearing is let go. While we have the shaft out, we'll replace those rubber couplings that join the shaft to the diff yoke and to the transmission output yoke. In some cases, if you have an aftermarket exhaust system, it may interfere with removing that drive shaft. If you've got a factory system, it should be right from what I've experienced on these V6 Commodores. I'll move on to this front coupling now and we'll disconnect that. The first bolts I'll start by undoing are the ones that go through the yoke off the transmission output. So undoing these nuts, they're 19 and the bolt head is 18. Now if you struggle to undo these, put the car back into park and just crack them one at a time. But with 2 spanners on it, should be right. Now this is where that ratchet spanner comes in handy, just to make the job a little bit quicker. I'll go through, undo those, and then we'll move on to the rear. Bolts undone now. You'll probably find that as you try and slide them back, they will interfere with the transmission, so you can't get them out. Just wind it around until you get that happy spot. There you go. You can pull them out. What I'll do next is I'll spray some WD-40 into here and we'll try and pry the yoke back off that rubber coupling. Just like that, hopefully. There we go. Slid off. That's some great success. We'll move on to the rear now. I'll undo these E-sockets, E-bolts now, which is the E18 socket you need, or a 9/16 multi-hex. Now I've still got the car in neutral, so I've just got the 18mm spanner locked up against the exhaust. Hopefully it'll hold it enough to crack it. And what we'll do, I'll go through and remove those 3 bolts and put some WD-40 in here as well to make it hopefully slide off. Spigot bearing just inside here, and I'll show you that once we've got it all apart. Now there's 2 bolts that hold the centre bearing in place. We'll just crack them off. Remove them. Now what I'll try and do is disconnect it from the diff end first, so we can drop the shaft down and then slide it back off the transmission and back out of the car. Hopefully I can set up the camera right for you so you can see what I'm doing.
There we have it, it's out. Now I may have forgotten one or two tools, sorry about that. Little podgy bar or pry bar and a paint marker. That'll be important. Probably the number one tool. But what I did to get that transmission end off, I put the podgy bar between the donut and the yoke and just pried it off.
What I've gone ahead and done is just marked where this donut goes to this part of the yoke of the drive shaft. I've marked a center point off the actual universal joint. Obviously we've taken that out, but just for reference, went across a bit of a straight line. And I'll show you another trick we'll do there. And I've done the same down here for that there. So you may notice little arrows on it, so use them as little reference points. So they'll go to the diff yoke, that'll go to the drive shaft. With a couple of blocks of wood, I've just put it underneath so we don't damage the shaft as we hit it with the hammer. We'll try and separate that section there to get the center bearing out. See how we go. With the copper hammer, I'll try and hit the shaft just up here. Hopefully it separates it. So you can see it's started to separate from the bearing and from the other part of the yoke. If you don't have a copper hammer, you can also do this with another block of wood on top, and with a decent gimpy, give that a bash. Now, once you've got that to start moving, just take it easy. Get it to the end to the spline. So with that slightly separated, I've just transferred the mark from there to onto the spline. So that way as I knock it off, we know that we need to try and line it up to that spline there. So what we'll do now, I'll continue knocking that shaft off. I'll just give that a bit more of a paint mark, and then we'll remove that center bearing. With that completely apart now, we'll move on to the center bearing, which is the outer race is about to come off anyway. Oh, there we go. We'll get a cold chisel just behind here, and we'll give that a slight persuasion and see if she comes off.
Now with the cold chisel on the back of the bearing, hopefully it separates, so give that a decent hit. Rotate the shaft, just to give it a bit of a even distribution of pulling it off. I think we're pretty much there. I'll just keep working that until it comes off. Done. So the new center bearing comes with a dust protector for the seal, which goes there, which it's up to you if you want to replace it or not. Again, you just tap that off with the hammer on each side, and then you need to tap that one back on. But what I can see is that'll go over nicely and stay in place. Stuff it, I'll replace that little dust cover, so I'll just put it on top of the block of wood with the chisel and just tap it down. Alright, little note to self, those little dust covers don't go straight back over. Well, hopefully my little muck up shows you, but what we'll do is we'll just put that back into there, slide the center bearing on, and then that'll lock up against there and the center bearing. Now I like to put a little bit of lube just on the inside of that bearing, so you can use a bit of WD-40 or a touch of grease just to help it go on. We'll slide that on. Now we get to a point where now we have to try and knock it onto that shaft. But what we'll do is you'll use the actual other end of the shaft to knock it into place. With that dust cover, you put that just over the top. Now I've got this sitting on top of a block of wood. Now I've got the spline white mark there. We'll try and line it up. With those marks lined up, I'll give it a gentle persuasion down just to get it started. Then we'll spray a bit of lube on there, a bit of WD-40 again, and then we'll send it home. So as you've seen, I just bashed that on with the copper hammer. If you don't have that, you can use a block of wood on top and use that hammer to hit it down. And you'll hear the tone of the echo of the metal change. It'll go solid as soon as you know it's home. There we go, center bearing done. Now we'll move on to these donuts. To these couplings now, we'll just undo these bolts and just take note of where those arrows on top are. So that goes to the shaft, that will go back to the yoke. I'll find the torque and I'll throw it up on screen. With the shaft all back together now, it's time to slot it back into place. And then we'll start by bolting the center bearing up. So just inside the yoke there, it's a bit of a spigot bearing. And what I'll do, I'll give that a bit of a clean and then a coat with WD-40 before we try and push the transmission end on. And I'll do the same on the diff end. We'll give that a clean and a spray with some WD-40 before we try and slide that end on. So this is up to you. I just throw a touch of Loctite on those bolts and we'll whack them up into place. Once I've got those bolts in loosely, I'll move up to the front coupling. I've just put the bolts in just up here and then rotated the shaft around till I get each bolt in. What we'll do now is I'll just slowly tighten up each one of these bolts until it pulls in evenly, and you might have to give it a bit of a wriggle, but that'll slot together. Then we'll tighten those bolts up. With those bolts all tightened up, a little trick if you need to lock it out, just got the spanner on that bolt there, and as the dry shaft comes around and you're tightening it, it locks out on the floor. So it's a little trick if you're trying to tighten it up. Moving down to the rear coupling, same thing again. We'll put those bolts in and we'll tighten them all up, and then we'll go back to the center bearing. Same thing again, I've just got the spanner on that bolt there,
jammed up against the lower control arm and tightening up those bolts. That way you can still spin the drive shaft around while you're under the car. Click. With that rear coupling all tightened up now, go back to your centre bearing and just tighten up those 2 bolts and we're pretty much done. Thanks for watching. Hope this helps you out in any way. If there's any other tips we can give others, throw it in the comments. Otherwise, yeah, take it easy and see you when I'm looking at you.